So it says you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. It's been a while since I focused on some paleontology, so I figured that taking a look at a talk by ICR's Brian Thomas might be a way to fix that. Brian Thomas is a PhD paleobiochemist. This means that if he misrepresents the science of paleontology, he doesn't really have an excuse as far as I'm concerned. He's going to be talking to us about paleoanthropology today. This talk is called Adam, Not Apes, so buckle up for some ad hominid arguments. Well, here he is.
So our task and topic for today is to deal with these pesky ape men.
And right off the bat, the data shouldn't be pesky. You'll notice that it's not actual scientists that groan about new finds expanding our knowledge. They get excited, and even more excited by new mysteries. Creationists, though, see data not as an opportunity to learn, but primarily as an obstacle to overcome.
So we're going to look at some of these interesting fossils.
You know, I'm something of a fossil myself.
So my story about these fossils, in a nutshell, is something like this.
I don't really care about Tom's personal conversion story. Basically, he read Henry Moore's stuff in the 90s and became a creationist. Turns out that he was excited to confirm the Bible, which means that that was something he was biased towards. Apparently, he then didn't know what to do with various hominins.
So I buckled down and started to read and research, and what I found was several trends.
Who wants to bet that the trends he found aren't actually trends recognized by workers in paleoanthropology, but only by creationist pseudoscientists who want to find ways around the data?
So one of those trends, I'll just lay it right out, is the three categories. I found this trend. All the fossils that I looked at, whatever its name is, fit into one of three categories. And none of those categories turned out to be evolutionary ancestor, or even evolutionarily friendly.
I can feel the contested bones just oozing out of him at this point. It's my creationism sense. It's like Spidey sense, except it tells me what creationist nonsense is coming next.
They all turned out to be friendly to the Genesis position.
Well, when you start out being willing to misrepresent data that you can't ignore and ignore data that you can, all because of a dogmatic conclusion that you're not allowed to deviate from, then you'll never find data that's really unfriendly. Just data that you wouldn't mention in polite company. This is a hallmark of pseudoscience. It doesn't matter how much alleged Bigfoot fur turns out to be bear fur, or how much Bigfoot scat turns out to be dung from a well-known animal, or how many environmental DNA studies fail to turn up any unknown ape. For the true believer, there's never evidence that could possibly diminish the faith in Bigfoot. Creationists aren't any different. They just have another unevidenced conclusion that they won't abandon.
And so we're going to look at just a few examples that illustrate these three categories. Who's ready to learn my cute little three categories today?
Me.
Okay, yay, half of us. The other half, come on, get ready. This is an important deal because if we came from apes.
Humans came from apes because humans are apes, in the same way that they're mammals or vertebrates. What makes humans vertebrates? Well, fundamentally, it's their spine. Vertebrates are animals with vertebrae. Humans have vertebrae, so they're vertebrates. What makes an animal a mammal? Well, among other things, mammals make milk in their mammary glands to feed their young. Humans do that. It's called lactation and breastfeeding. So, what are apes? Well, they're animals with enclosed forward-facing orbits, tricuspid molars, a coccyx rather than an external tail, enlarged brains, and a flexible shoulder joint that allows for full rotation. The thing is, humans are that too. If humans are mammals, they're apes. On its own, that doesn't necessitate common ancestry with other apes, but it does mean that fundamentally, humans are apes.
Then verses like this, which...
Nope, I'm not here for Bible hour. I'm skipping the Bible stuff.
And so if there was no actual first person, then that undermines the credibility of the last person.
And there's the real motive. Intellectual cowardice. He can't be wrong about his theology, so instead, it's reality that's wrong. I'm sorry, but if you believe things for theological reasons that are flatly contradicted by the reality you see around you, you are believing things that are wrong. That's what it means to be wrong. To be at odds with reality. If your theology depends on the historicity of Adam as the first ever human and separate ancestry of humans from other apes, then your theology is wrong. Get better theology.
Which I think is what this whole topic, the way it's presented by the secular position, I think that's what it's all about, is undermining our understanding or the logic behind the gospel.
No, it's not. Look, there's no conspiracy to try to overturn Christianity in academia. I know a fair few scientists in different fields, including evolutionary biology and even paleoanthropology. Some of them are Christians, and even the ones who aren't don't particularly care one way or the other about Christianity. The idea of trying to undermine Christianity with science doesn't even cross their minds. They're here to learn new things about the world around us. Think about this. When astronomers fail to find any evidence of the moon having been split in two, is it because they're horrible Islamophobes who want to undermine Islam? When historians point out that there's no evidence for the existence of Moses, and the archaeological record contradicts the conquest narrative of Joshua, is it because they're anti-Semites? No, obviously not. That's just how the data have turned out. No one in paleontology thinks about disproving Christianity, and only extremist fringe Christians are threatened by their work anyway. Look, I'm not here telling you what theology to adopt. I'm not your priest, I'm not your bishop, your imam, your rabbi, your pastor, your confessor, or anything else. But I will tell you this. If you think it's reality that has the problem, you're wrong.
So to restore that logic, we have to know something about, I think it would help if we knew something about the trends that we can find in these fossils.
Let me know in the comments if you think these will be real trends or made-up creationist trends that you have to be ignorant or dishonest to accept.
So we're going to look at 4 examples in the next 30 minutes or less. And these are the examples. We'll look at Ida first, then Lucy, then Homo habilis, Neanderthal. The Germans pronounce it with a hard T, like my last name, Thomas, so Neanderthal.
That's how I pronounce it too. Here's a fun fact. The th sound in English is one of the rarest sounds in the world's languages. It occurs in English, some varieties of Spanish, Greek, Arabic, and almost no other languages. In fact, some varieties of English don't even have it. Irish English got rid of it in favor of a retroflex stop, meaning that to a native speaker of Irish English, the words thin and tin still sound different, even though they're pronounced tin and tin, which for most English speakers sound exactly the same. Sorry, I accidentally went on a linguistics rant. I promise, I'm not a linguist.
And then modern man. We won't look at modern man because you look at that in the mirror, so you're good to go on that.
Speak for yourself, monkey man.
Okay, so 4 examples. Each one of them are going to illustrate one of the 3 categories.
I'm not sure that math is mathing, but okay.
That all these fit into. And as we go, I'm going to show these little icons. Here's an icon of a golf ball on a golf tee. And I'm going to grab my golf tee, imagine it here. I'm going to push it in the ground in my imagination. And I'm going to say, let's, and then when I do this, we all together say, tee it up. It's going to go like this. Let's tee it up.
Maybe I'm just a curmudgeon, but that sounds like the stupidest, most condescending thing. I'm glad I wasn't in that audience, but whatever.
And at that point, I'm going to explain to you what the evolutionary news media said about a particular fossil when it first came out. Does that make sense?
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Get on with it!
And so that's all we're going to do today for the next 4 examples, starting with Ida. So here's Ida, and we're going to, let's tee it up. Here's Ida.
Ida is the nickname for a particular individual fossil of the species Darwinius massillae. It was discovered in 1983, but not described until 2009. Unfortunately, it has something in common with Archaeoraptor, the fake dinosaur, that was published by National Geographic. There were press releases and even a documentary made about Ida before any actual primatologist, paleontologist, or paleoanthropologist actually got to examine it. As a result, aspirational rather than well-supported ideas were the first thing that the public heard about Ida, indicating that she was basal to both dry-nosed primates like humans and wet-nosed primates like lemurs, or that she was just barely on the dry-nose side. One important thing to note is that Ida was never touted as a hominin. That is, an ape more closely related to humans than to chimpanzees. She was potentially a transitional fossil way further back than that, which makes it a bit odd that she's even in this discussion.
Here's what they said about Ida in the spring of 2009.
Yeah, in The Guardian, which is a newspaper, not a peer-reviewed journal.
Extraordinary find is missing link. It is the missing link. Wow, we've been looking for this for so long, and now we finally have the missing link. And there's a picture of the fossil Ida.
This is why I hate the phrase missing link. It implies the idea that there is some one hypothetical fossil that is the missing link. But that's not how it works. First, there is no one fossil on which evolution hinges. Second, a better term would be transitional fossil. This gets rid of the expectation that some single, generally as yet unknown fossil will be the single thing that finally elucidates the evolution of a lineage. In fact, many lineages have numerous transitional forms, and the human lineage is one of the lineages with the most. A transitional form is an organism with derived traits from a later group of organisms, as well as basal traits common to a wider group, but that have been lost in the later group. For example, a derived trait in humans is that the hole in the skull where the nerves cross from the spine to the brain is on the bottom rather than at the back of the skull. A basal trait common in apes, but absent in humans, is a divergent big toe that can oppose the other toes. An animal like Ardipithecus has both, and so is transitional. It doesn't matter if Ardipithecus is directly ancestral to humans, just that she's closer to humans than other apes, and that she have the mix of basal and derived traits that define a transitional species.
This little creature is going to show us our connection with all the rest of the mammals, said Sir David Attenborough, who speaks with a British accent. And how could he possibly be wrong?
I'd argue that while his statement is exaggerated and perhaps hyperbolic, that he's not entirely wrong. Ida is a very basal primate, and no matter where in the primate family tree she falls, she is a basal member of the group that is more derived than the earliest North American primates, but less derived than our earliest anthropoids or lemurs, making her a transitional form representative of a particular stage in primate evolution. She's an invaluable find, despite the overblown statements in the media that were made about her. If you want to be invaluable to me, like Ida is to primate paleontology, why not consider joining my Patreon? It's linked in the description, and you can get, for just $1 a month, access to videos like this up to 6 months early, as well as access to my supporter-only Discord server. You can get a 15% discount for pledging annually, and there are higher-priced tiers with more perks if that's your thing.
The guy who stands to gain fame, funding, and fortune, Huram, he's the one who found it.
No, he's not. The full quote is, "This will be the one pictured in the textbooks for the next 100 years, said Dr. Jorn Huram, the paleontologist from Oslo University's Natural History Museum who assembled the scientific team to study the fossil." That's the end of the same sentence Thomas is reading. Did he not even read the PopSci article he's referencing? It's actually not clear who first discovered Ida, but she was sold to a private collector, which is why there was a gap of some 26 years between her discovery and the publication that first described her in 2009. That being said, Huram certainly did stand to gain by pushing the importance of Darwinius, and he did so in ways I find inappropriate.
And is promoting it, and put it together for a National Geographic special television episode before it was even peer-reviewed by the scientists.
Now, that part is true, and that's entirely inappropriate. The guys who pretended to have discovered cold fusion did that too, as did the man behind the Archaeoraptor debacle. Never trust PopSci reporting about a new find if the actual paper or papers on the find haven't been published. Even then, you might want to wait until people beyond the authors and reviewers have had a chance to look at it. But I want to drive something home. Misconduct by some scientists does not invalidate the work of scientists in that field broadly. For one thing, if that were the way we were supposed to judge people, I have to say that Christianity would not come out well, especially given how many horrible things various Christian leaders have done. As an example, look at the late Cardinal Bernard Law, who was forcibly retired after it came out that he had knowingly been shuffling priests that were, shall we say for the sake of my monetization, doing bad things with human larvae. Also, in a weird twist, I met him a couple times before the scandal broke, and we even had a reasonably lengthy conversation. Maybe Brian wouldn't count that because he thinks Catholics aren't Christians. Well, in the last few years, similar abuse scandals have been breaking about the Southern Baptist Convention. What about known archaeological frauds in Christianity? Like that time a guy managed to convince a bunch of Christian organizations that he'd found the teriyaki-flavored Ark of Noah. Or basically anything Ron Wyatt has ever pretended to find, like when he pretended that coral and modern shipwrecks in the Red Sea were actually Pharaoh's chariots from Exodus. Or when he pretended to find the Ark of the Covenant under the Garden Tomb, a place that some Protestants pretend is the tomb of Jesus, even though that's chronologically and geographically impossible. By the way, while there's no evidence that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is maintained jointly by the Catholic Church, the Oriental Orthodox Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, is where the tomb of Jesus is, it's at least a possible location for it, unlike the Garden Tomb. Do things like abuse scandals and fraudulent archaeology mean that Christianity is false? I wouldn't say so. I don't think those things are determinative on that question. Similarly, misconduct by scientists is bad, and it should be punished where found, but it doesn't matter at all to the actual validity of the science going on that isn't fraudulent.
He said this will be the one pictured in the textbook for the next 100 years.
He's probably right, at least in primatology textbooks, and maybe in vertebrate paleontology textbooks.
By the way, it's not in the textbooks today.
Oh? Has he actually checked? It's not like Darwinius suddenly stopped existing after it turned out it was probably not a haplorhine, but rather a strepsirrhine, which, spoilers, is what he's building to. Now, I'm not going to hunt down every biology, primatology, or anthropology text from 2009 to present to find out, but I'll note that at least LibreText has it in their Intro to Biological Anthropology course. The animal is discussed in the anthropology textbook Primate Adaptation and Evolution, 3rd edition. Thanks to Jackson Wheat for checking that one for me. Also, it's mentioned in A Companion to Biological Anthropology in a chapter titled Primate Origins by Mary T. Silcox and Sergey Lopez Torres. Special thanks to Gutsa Gibbon for checking that for me. In that text, it says, the most complete specimen of a fossil primate known also pertains to an adapoid, Darwinius massillae, from the Eocene, approximately 47 million years ago, Lagerstätten deposits of Messel, Germany. Among the extraordinary discoveries possible from the Darwinius skeleton is the first evidence of stomach contents for a fossil primate, Franzen and Wild 2003, consisting of fruit and leaves. Interestingly, no evidence of insects remains were found, even though they were a common element of Messel stomach contents. The Darwinius skeleton, aka Ida, pertained to a subadult of perhaps just over 1 year, Lopez Torres et al., 2015, that is assumed to be female based on the lack of an osbaculum, Franzen et al., 2009. Adaptively, Darwinius is inferred to have been a nocturnal arboreal quadruped without particular specializations for leaping, Franzen et al., 2009. Interpretation of the Darwinius skeleton has brought debates about the role of adapoids in the larger picture of primate evolution into sharp relief. So yeah, it's in textbooks.
And there's a good reason for that.
Is there a good reason for why Brian Thomas would say something that is so easily shown to be not true? I can't think of one, but I can think of some bad reasons.
As we'll look at. So, cooler heads looked at the same fossil, Ida. And there are the legs, peculiar looking legs in this creature. And it turns out that they match peculiar looking legs in a creature that you can go see in the Dallas Zoo right now.
I'll bet they don't. I'll bet he says that they look like lemur legs.
Any guesses on that creature? It leaps. It's a lemur. Oh, it's a lemur.
Hey, remember that time just a few seconds ago when I was reading from a textbook, and the textbook pointed out specifically that Darwinius didn't have any adaptations to leaping? Yeah, that's because Darwinius is specifically not a lemur. It also lacks a grooming claw and a tooth comb, two other key aspects of lemur anatomy that is shared by all extant lemurs, but not by Ida, meaning that while she is not a human ancestor, she is still absolutely a transitional form from basal adapomorph primates to later lemurs.
You know what? It's a dead lemur, so it's no missing link.
No, it's not. That's just a lie. That's not the position of any primatologist looking at Darwinius. It's a basal strepsirrhine, and Strepsirini is the group of wet-nosed primates. Today, that group includes lorises, lemurs, and galagos. But Darwinius is none of these, and it's basal to them, making it a transitional fossil. The mistake was in thinking it was on the dry-nosed side of the primate family tree, the Haplorhini, which is the side to which humans belong. Darwinius lacks the diagnostic traits of lemurs, lorises, and galagos. And here's the thing. Either Thomas has read the literature and knows this, and is lying, or he has not and is presenting himself as if he has, and is lying. Christians, if you're watching this, why does Brian Thomas feel the need to lie to you about this? If his conclusions about science were true, shouldn't he be able to support them without lying? If, like he implied about science, bad behavior from some workers in the field means that the whole field is suspect, then what does the fact that he is lying to us in his first example mean for young Earth creationism?
All right, so in the fall of that same year, headlines came out. I would call them low lines.
Damn, bro, you got the whole squad laughing.
No National Geographic episode special came out saying, we were wrong. Nope.
Well, yeah, National Geographic is a for-profit pop-sci publication. But if you check out the original 2009 article describing D. massillae, you'll find it has 2 corrections. And if you do a search for other papers, you'll find the very public paper saying that D. massillae is a strepsirrhine, not a haplorhine. Now, where will I be able to find the public announcement correcting Dr. Thomas's blatant lies that he has told, and likely will tell in this very talk? Probably nowhere. See how at every turn, every accusation from a creationist against the scientific community is actually an admission?
But everyone watched the episodes saying, this is our new missing link.
I didn't, because I know better than to rely on National Geographic for science news. And also, if we have to use the term missing link, that part wasn't wrong.
But the debunking of the missing link happened in the labs, and a few scientists recognized, look, these are lemurs.
Liar! Liar!
No, they didn't, because they're not. And this is what science is supposed to do. It's the initial pre-publication press and documentaries that were inappropriate, and no one is pretending that they weren't.
And a lemur died. So because a lemur died, does that mean I have to go back to my Bible and go, well, a lemur died, so therefore Adam's not real. Let me erase that from the book.
I don't particularly care what you do, but Ida remains evidence of the early evolution of primates, the group to which humans belong. She's not on the lineage leading to humans, but is rather transitional for another group of primates. But I'll point out that if you think that evolution is overall a problem for your religion, then yes, she's a problem for your religion. Because she's evidence of evolution. And she's not a lemur.
Not at all. It's just a dead lemur.
No.
Okay, no threat at all. In fact, in a way, it confirms what Genesis said all along, repeating 10 times in just the first chapter, that these creatures are supposed to reproduce according to their kinds.
What part of reproducing after their own kind predicts a transitional wet-nosed primate basal to all extant wet-nosed primates? It's actually a direct refutation of the idea of kinds. Evolution absolutely requires and predicts that organisms with some but not all of the traits of modern strepsirrhine primates must have existed in the past. Creationism cannot make any such claim, and really there's no reason to expect them under creationism. The fact that such things exist is evidence for evolution and against anti-evolution creationism.
Which means lemurs would always have been lemurs and always will be lemurs.
Okay, so if Ida is a lemur, that shows that lemurs have always been lemurs. Does that mean that the converse is true? If she's not a lemur, does that mean that lemurs did evolve from non-lemurs? Because, she's not a lemur.
And that's what this actually illustrates. The faithfulness according to kinds.
I guess it's opposite day, but notice the argument here. Brian Thomas is presented with an animal that was at first seen as a transition either from before the split between haplorhines and strepsirrhines, or just on the strepsirrhine line, and therefore on the human side of the split. It turns out it's on the lemur side of the split. He then just makes up that it was a lemur, even though it's actually not, and it's still transitional, then concludes that since it's a lemur, that it's confirmation that evolution hasn't occurred, as if lemurs didn't have any internal evolution either, implying that the ii and the ring-tailed lemur are of the same kind. But it's probably important to know how we can say that Darwinius isn't a lemur. Well, lemurs have two very clear anatomical traits that Darwinius lacked. The first is a grooming or toilet claw. This is a claw on the second digit of the foot that in all living strepsirrhine primates is used for grooming purposes. Also, the front bottom incisors in Darwinius do not form a tooth comb, which is a characteristic of all living strepsirrhine primates, including lemurs. We know that Darwinius can't belong to any living group of wet-nosed primates. Now, within the clade that contains all living strepsirrhines, but not Darwinius, that is, lemuriforms, lemurs are characterized by their sociality and pointed snouts. But since Darwinius is already disqualified as a lemuriform, it can't be an actual lemur. In terms of modern animals, this is a bit like Thomas pointing to a hippo and saying it's just a dolphin, and then concluding that evolution is fake. The difference is that unlike hippos and dolphins, most people aren't too familiar with adapoids and lemuriforms.
By the way, the broad picture of evolution attacks that biblical statement head on by asserting that creatures morph between kinds.
No, it doesn't, because as far as evolutionary biology goes, there is no such thing as a kind. Kind is an alleged clade that shares common ancestry within itself, but not outside itself. So if there were a canid kind, then all members of Canidae would be in the kind, but even relatively closely related animals like bears, seals, and raccoons would not be related to them at all. But notice what that means. Since evolution posits universal common ancestry for life on Earth, there can only be one kind, at least on Earth, and all life is part of that kind, so a transition from one kind to another makes no sense. So why do creationists seem to have a problem understanding this? Well, I can't say for sure, but it seems like they're Neoplatonists. Now, you might find that surprising, since virtually none of them ever talk about Plato or Platonism. But if you study Christian theology, one of the big influences that comes from outside first century Judaism is Platonic philosophy. Indeed, the whole idea in the Catholic Church of transubstantiation is also deeply embedded in Greek philosophical ideas about substance and accidents. One of the key ways that creationists identify kinds internally is something they call the cognitum, which is essentially you recognize kinds because you just do. This is related to the Platonic idea of the realm of ideals, in which we recognize objects in the physical world only because of their participation in various ideals in the immaterial realm of ideals. In other words, while creationists don't always consciously conceptualize it this way, they act as if there are ideal kinds of organisms that are immaterial, and that animals can only participate in one of them, but they may vary within the bounds of that ideal form. In this sense, it seems easy to see why they think of evolution as going between these kinds. So for example, if I show you Probanognathus and say that it's morphologically representative of a human ancestor, it's hard for them to see those as both part of the same ideal form of organism, so intuitively they reject them as being part of the same kind. This also explains, at least in part, why it is that creationists sometimes get upset by the results of baromnology. For example, when Todd Wood found some hominins that are generally considered to be just apes were in fact in the humankind, there was some uproar, and this, I believe but cannot prove, is because those creationists had previously decided, based on their internal model of the ape ideal, that these animals were in the ape kind. But Todd Wood arguing that they are closer to human than, say, chimps, was a rejection of their cognitum-based Neoplatonic take on the kind of these animals. This also explains why the idea of monophyly seems to be lost on the average creationist. The idea that new clades can come about, but that old ones don't go away, and so an organism remains what its ancestors were, is flatly contradictory of the Neoplatonic conception of organisms.
But the scripture is adamant, according to kinds, reproducing, faithful to the kind. So,
but if the word kind is defined in a non-Neoplatonist way of being a clade that does not share common ancestry with other clades, then evolution agrees that organisms will always reproduce after their kind.
So anyway, that's Ida, and it illustrates our first category. So we're going to let them, and let's knock it out. So we're going to knock it out. They knocked it out. You don't have to get a PhD in paleoanthropology to see how to knock this one off the tee. Hey, that rhymes.
I mean, it was knocked out of the human lineage, but it's still a vitally important animal for the understanding of evolution of primates as a whole, the group to which humans belong. The fact that a transitional form isn't a transition leading to humans is neither a problem for evolution nor specifically for human evolution. It's evidence for evolution on the whole, in fact. The transitional horses, whales, ceratopsians, sloths, etc. are also not human ancestors, or even close to it, but they all demonstrate morphological evolution over geological time, something predicted by evolution.
Quite cleverly. Yeah, all you have to do is let the words of the hostile witness. So here's the guy Huram. He stands to gain fame, funding, and fortune, but his colleagues are actually his enemies, and they want the glory for themselves. They want funding for themselves, and so there's a little bit of personal rivalry going on here. And they're saying it's just a dead lemur, and he's saying,
again, no one is saying that because it's definitely not a lemur. The debate was over whether it was a wet-nosed or a dry-nosed primate, and there was so much debate specifically because it is so transitional. Darwinius is so close to what we'd expect the common ancestor of both to look like, and has so few of the diagnostic traits characteristic of members of either group, that it was hard to place it. That's more evidence of its transitional nature, not less. And sure, it turns out it was closer to the modern lemurs than to modern monkeys, humans included, but that's still astounding confirmation of previous ideas about the evolution of primates. The problem is simply that the press and documentaries were not handled well and supported Huram's pet hypothesis, which in the end seems to have been incorrect. Darwinius is both stunning confirmation of evolutionary theory and also a cautionary tale against rushing to the press with preliminary scientific findings that have not yet been scrutinized by others.
it's a missing link. No, it isn't.
Yes, it is, and both sides agree on this.
So we have this controversy going on with not just Ida, but as we'll see, every single offered potential candidate for human ancestry.
Well, the same controversy would be whether the animal in question is a strepsirrhine or haplorhine primate. That seems really, really unlikely. But also, yeah, I was right. He's using the same basic argument as Contested Bones by Sanford and Roop. That any disagreement about the phylogenetic placement of a hominin removes it from the ranks of transitional species between modern humans and Basal-Miocene apes. But of course, that's a silly argument that misunderstands both what transitional species are and how scientific discourse works. If you want to be among people who do understand what transitional species are and how scientific discourse works, why not subscribe to the channel? It's reversible, free, and if you hit the bell icon and turn on all notifications, you'll even maybe be notified by YouTube, sometimes.
Bone crunching debunks. It's debunked. It was just hype.
Well, there certainly was hype, and it was debunked as the oldest monkey, but instead it turns out to be the oldest wet-nosed primate. It's still transitional, it's still really cool, and it's still important, and it's still evidence for the evolution of primates. So as far as debunking goes, it wasn't debunked in any way that helps out special creation.
And so that illustrates our first category, which we're going to call animal. Category 1, animal. Say animal. All right, it's a dead animal. Does that threaten Genesis or our history in Adam?
So his examples are going to be Ida, Lucy, Homo habilis, and Neanderthals. Those are all animals. We have evidence of animal life going back some 800 million years. You'd have to go farther back than that still to get to the first human ancestor that wasn't an animal. I honestly don't even know what he wants his audience to infer from this. Is he going to claim that apes are not animals? That would be a weird take.
Nope. In fact, death is an intrusion into what was originally very good. The origin of death is actually found in Genesis chapter 3.
Cool claim. Shame there's no evidence for it, and that the very existence of the fossil record undermines it.
And so the Bible says you should see design, and it should be crumbling apart.
Seems like the Bible is 0 for 2 then.
And we have creatures that die. And so death is an intruder that will be erased one day by the action of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Creator and Redeemer.
Sure, if you say so. Look, have whatever eschatological beliefs you want, I guess. Although, maybe stop it with the ones with the imminent doom that gives people an excuse to be bad stewards of the earth. But either way, whether Jesus comes back to finally conquer death and upon those in the tombs bestow life or not, there is no evidence of a period of time before death that isn't just before life. Death is simply a part of life. It's not clear that you can have living things without having death.
So that's what we're looking forward to. And so far, the Bible stands tall. What about Lucy?
Yeah, what about Lucy?
Let's look at Lucy. 6th grade public school textbooks in California show Lucy on the left.
Jesus Christ. That's not even the same species as Lucy. That's Mrs. Ples, not only a different individual than Lucy, but a member of Australopithecus africanus. Lucy is A. afarensis. Would Brian show up with a coyote and tell his son that it's actually their runaway puppy Trigger? No, probably not. Because he's probably not dumb enough in real life to think that any random member of a different species is the same as a specific member of a different species. We're off to a great start with our first official ad hominid argument.
Homo habilis in the middle, and Homo sapiens on the right.
2 for 3. He's doing better than the Bible so far.
It goes from sort of small to medium to large, and it goes from really slopey forehead to kind of slopey forehead to kind of straight up and down forehead.
So Homo habilis did have a higher cranial vault than any Australopithecus species, but it's not really visible in this image. For those of you who are interested, this is the skull of an H. habilis individual commonly known as Twiggy, and who is more properly, but more boringly known as OH24. It is the oldest fossil skull from the Olduvai Gorge and the second most complete, although the more complete skull, OH5, or Nutcracker Man, is Paranthropus boisei, not H. habilis. Perhaps some of the reason that the cranial vaulting is hard to see is that Twiggy's skull was crushed mostly flat, and that cannot be fully fixed in restorations like the one shown on screen.
And so students are supposed to look at this and get the impression that evolution has happened. We came from apes, starting with Australopithecus, if you want to say that.
I've already said it, but humans don't just come from apes. You are apes. Just like humans are mammals, vertebrates, and animals, they're apes. But I've already talked about this, so I'll just move on. One thing, though, is that Australopithecus is just an early genus of hominin, and it's far from the first. Ardipithecus and Sahelanthropus are 2 earlier hominin genera. Hominins are the apes closer to humans than to any other living ape.
Anyway, let's just call it Lucy if you want to go that way.
No, I don't. Lucy is the nickname of one individual Australopithecus afarensis. Calling all of her genus by her name would be even more silly than referring to all modern humans by your mom's name. It just breeds confusion, and it also allows creationists to pretend that we only know as much about any Australopithecus as we can learn from just the single individual Lucy, which is very wrong, and that's what I call an ad hominid argument.
Here's what they said in 1974 when it was published in National Geographic.
Lucy was not described in National Geographic, because that's not a peer-reviewed technical journal. Lucy was described in 1982 in the paper Morphology of the Pliocene Partial Hominid Skeleton AL288-1 from the Hadar Formation, Ethiopia, by Donald C. Johansen et al. In the American Journal of Biological Anthropology.
Lucy had a lumbar curve, and that's significant because modern apes, like gorillas and chimpanzees, they don't have the S-shaped back that humans have. They have a C-shaped back.
That's true.
So they don't have the lumbar or the lower back curve. They just have a straight back.
No, Brian had it right the first time. It's curved. It's just that there is one curve with no inflection point. Unlike the human spine, which has 2 curves and an inflection point around the switch from lumbar to thoracic vertebrae. This is called lumbar lordosis, and it helps the weight of the human torso be more easily carried by just the 2 hind limbs while maintaining balance.
By the way, that gives them stability and rigidity from which they can do what in the trees? swing from tree branches.
While all apes, including humans, can brachiate as a result of their extremely flexible shoulder joints and relatively high grip strength, only the hylobatids and the orangutans are really habitual brachiators. Gorillas, chimps, and humans, all of whom are more closely related to each other than to any other apes, are far more terrestrial, and chimpanzees frequently clamber along branches rather than brachiating. The simple C-curved spine has as much to do with quadrupedal locomotion as with brachiation.
Okay, human-like pelvis is what was claimed, and then human-like knee and human-like foot.
The human-like pelvis specifically refers to the angle of the sacral arches or iliac crests, which allow for a prodigious and rear-facing gluteus maximus, which in humans is the main retractor muscle for the femur, and is a big part of the stride strength and length, and the muscle additionally is one of the most important muscles in adjusting balance dynamically, allowing humans to walk around without falling over all the time, because of the inherent instability of a bipedal gait. With the knee, the specific adaptation is that the knee was valgus. That also has to do with balance. When walking, a biped's balance from side to side is best served by having the center of balance as close to the midline as possible. This keeps the center of mass from going too far to one side or another, balancing the animal, and it also minimizes the amount of energy needed to correct for swaying or loss of balance. The problem is, though, that for the sake of strength, a wide set of hips is generally better, and so there needs to be a way to pull the widely set femurs projecting from the hip sockets together so that the center of balance can come towards the midline. This is accomplished by having a femur which is angled laterally. But for efficiency and balance, you want the knee to articulate primarily up and down, not side to side. So the tibia and the fibula need to be more or less vertical. This combination of constraints forces the angle of the top of the knee joint on the part of the femur, that is the condyle, to be at a distinct angle from the femoral shaft. This means that if you set the femur of a human on a table with the condyle flat on the table, you'll see it has a very noticeable angle to the femoral shaft. But if you do the same with a chimp femur, the femur will be much less angled and closer to vertical. Lucy herself was not found with a foot, but the combination of the Laetoli prints, which are from the right time and the right size to be Australopithecus footprints, as well as from actual fossil feet from other Australopithecus individuals, such as the aptly named Littlefoot, we know that Australopithecus had feet with inline big toes like humans, but they were arched a bit differently, and in that way, were actually somewhat intermediate between chimpanzee feet and modern human feet.
So man, this thing is like partly ape, partly human. It must be the missing link.
Well, it's entirely ape because humans are apes, in the same way that they're mammals or vertebrates. You can't simply escape your ancestry. You are what your ancestors were. As for being half human, I'm not sure I'd put a number on it, but Australopithecus has many of the apomorphies that we only find in modern humans, including those that Thomas already mentioned, but also others like reduced canine size and the ventral foramen magnum. At the same time, it retains certain plesiomorphic or basal or primitive traits that we associate with the ancestral condition for apes, such as a low and sloping forehead, prominent brow ridges, the lack of a chin, etc. What this means is that since a transitional form is a form that mixes the apomorphies of a later taxon with the plesiomorphic traits common to a wider group to which the organism belongs, but which are no longer present in the later group, Australopithecus is a transitional form.
Okay, so to look at the anatomy differences between humans and apes, these scientists recently put together a structure, and they mapped different body parts when chimps walk, and they put the same markers to make digital maps on chimps and humans.
Which is super cool, by the way.
And what they found is, see there's some differences when we walk as opposed to when chimps walk.
Well, yeah, because chimps and humans aren't the same species. Humans are obligate bipeds, and chimps are facultative bipeds. That means that generally, human beings have to walk bipedally, and if they can't, it's considered a pathology. Chimps, though, can walk bipedally if they want, but they typically don't. Interestingly, chimps are more likely to walk bipedally if they are trying to carry a lot of stuff, which allows them to carry things in both arms, much like a human.
And the chimp walks with a stiff back, and actually it's okay, so here's a human, and so there's your pelvis, is this pelvic girdle down here, your shoulder girdle is above, but we have an S-shaped back, and we have a flexible lower spine.
Yeah, we've already been over this. Is there a point coming?
So that when we take a left foot forward, for example, our right shoulder comes forward. And it's kind of like loading up a spring with every step. Load, release, load, release. And so that's why humans can run marathons and no animal can.
Humans are indeed exceptional distance runners, but then again, horses and camels are also capable of running, but not sprinting, for extended periods too. Also, humans are animals, so even if humans were the only persistence runners out there, it still wouldn't be true that no animals can run a marathon. If he means marathon literally, as in the actual distance of a real marathon, then I honestly don't know nor care if any animals besides humans can keep up a running gait that long. One thing that I do care about that won't help anyone run for a longer time is my channel memberships. You can join with the join button right below this video, and you can get access to special channel emojis, early access to my scripted videos like this one, and even more perks at higher tiers.
In contrast, chimpanzees, look at this, when they walk, left leg forward, left shoulder forward, because they don't have the flexibility in their spine. So they kind of walk like this.
Yep, chimps are not well adapted to bipedal locomotion. That's rather why they only do it when they have some reason to. Like to reach something high up, or to carry more than they can carry in one arm. But what's the point of this? How does this relate to Australopithecus?
So now we get to look at Lucy for real.
Finally. Also, I cut out a thing where he had his audience pretend to not be able to flex their backs from side to side. There was no point to it, or at least I don't see one.
Okay, the claim was made that Lucy's lumbar back was S-curved and flexible, and look what's not even there.
Oh no, she doesn't have any lumbar vertebrae there. But you see that bone that's medial to her left ilium? That's the sacrum. The top of the sacrum is where the lumbar vertebrae connect to the hips. You can tell from the shape of it which direction the lumbar vertebrae are going when they connect. If the top of the articular surface on the sacrum is angled dorsally, then the lumbar vertebrae curve dorsally, and so the animal can't have human-like lumbar lordosis. But if the articular surface is angled ventrally, then the animal's vertebrae also came in from that angle, and it has to have had lumbar lordosis. Australopithecus sacra have articular surfaces that require lumbar lordosis.
The bones.
I feel like Brian's audience could handle the term lumbar vertebrae, but okay.
Now this is some of the worst science. It's not even science, because at the most fundamental level, science is supposed to be about that which is observable.
And Lucy's sacrum is in fact observable, so I guess this is science after all. And the thing is, it's not like it's very hard to find out the reason that scientists have concluded that Australopithecus afarensis had lumbar lordosis. It's because of the angle of the sacrum, but Dr. Thomas seemingly hasn't bothered. Maybe he's lazy. Maybe he just credulously accepts the words of his fellow pseudoscientists, or maybe he's lying. I don't really know. Paleoanthropology is certainly not his field, so it's plausible that in his schooling he was never exposed to this information. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think he's lazy, credulous, or lying.
The best science is observable and repeatable.
Good news, everyone!
The sacra of Lucy, as well as other Australopiths, are observable, and since there are a bunch of them, those observations are repeatable. I guess this is the best science. Hooray!
This is neither. There's nothing there to see. It's just storytelling in a place where there's no evidence.
Well, a story is generally a narrative concerning a sequence of events that happen to characters within the narrative. This is the firm conclusion of the analysis of the sacrum of Lucy and others. Also, Lucy might not have had lumbar vertebrae preserved, but remember how his alleged Lucy skull was actually the skull of Mrs. Pless, not Lucy? Well, guess what? Mrs. Pless had a virtually complete spinal column preserved. So we don't even have to rely on Lucy. Mrs. Pless has those bones that Thomas is complaining about not being extant, and she has lumbar lordosis. Does Thomas just not know that Lucy isn't the only Australopithecus skeleton we have? So not only would this objection not be valid if Lucy were our only specimen, but since she's not, this objection is also based on a faulty premise.
And so, anyway, so that's the claim. The claim is based on no data.
No data, except, the actual data from both Lucy and other Australopiths that show conclusively that the members of the genus had lumbar lordosis, and so had spines with flexibility and stability more like that of Homo sapiens than that of, say, Pan troglodytes, the common chimpanzee.
Okay, so the knee is a human-like knee. Well, I wonder why.
To facilitate upright bipedal locomotion. Same reason the spine has lumbar lordosis.
Found 200 feet deeper and hundreds of feet further away from the rest of the skeletal elements that were all assembled together into this original Lucy.
So that's a lie, but I don't know if it's Brian Thomas's lie. The knee he's talking about is AL129-1, which is a left knee of an Australopithecus afarensis found before Lucy by Donald Johanson in November of 1973. The next year, Lucy was found some 2.5 kilometers away. Lucy doesn't have a full knee on either side, rather having the proximal side of her left knee and the distal side of her right knee. All the bones in AL129-1 are from the same side and are not included in the picture of Lucy he's showing us. However, the morphology of the knee is consistent with the distal end of Lucy's left femur and the proximal end of her right tibia, so the knee is a match even though it's from a different individual.
Okay, what about the inner ear?
I guess that's it about the knee then. Seems like there was more to it, but sure, let's move on.
So apes, this is pretty cool. This may be worth the price of admission.
I highly doubt that, unless the price is a very, very large negative number.
Okay, so for humans, we have a big hole in the bottom of our head
So, not the inner ear then.
that integrates with our spine. Okay, it's called the foramen magnum, which is Latin for big hole.
That's true.
It's in the bottom. Okay, but for apes, the hole's in the back.
Other apes.
And so what that means is their inner ear, their organ of balance, is oriented like this, whereas in us, it's oriented like this. For apes, the hole's in the back. Why? Because their natural and their most efficient mode of locomotion on the ground is knuckle walking, so it's like they're on all fours. And so if their head was structured like ours, they'd be looking at the ground all day and wouldn't be able to see where they're going. So God designed them to where their head is oriented this way according to their spine so that they can always walk like this without having to crane their neck up.
Other than the attribution of a teleological explanation, yes. The reason has to do with habitual posture.
So that when we stand, we feel like we're naturally oriented when we're upright, not like apes. Anyway, Lucy had the ape inner ear.
Did she now? That's interesting because Lucy didn't have any preserved inner ear structures. You know who did though? The Dakika child. And while it did have chimp-like semicircular canals, it had a human-like cochlea, meaning that Australopithecus had a transitional inner ear that wasn't like a chimp's or a human's, but was intermediate. You know, the kind of thing you might expect if you were looking at an evolutionary transition.
I had, in the pelvis, the human-likeness of the pelvis was probably adjusted from reconstructing fragments, gluing them together according to what the paleontologist wanted to see.
I suppose that technically Brian is right here. The scientists wanted to see an anatomically possible pelvis because the original shape of the pelvis wasn't. The original configuration of the fossil had three major problems. The first is that the joint between the sacrum and the ilium was basically gone, because the pelvis had been shoved into it in an unnatural way. Second, the pelvis was obviously shattered at some point because it was visibly broken into pieces that were cemented together. The fossil was found in sedimentary rock, which is composed of grains and a cementing agent which hold the grain together. The same cementing agent seeped into the pelvis and held it together after it was shattered. Finally, and certainly not least, the configuration of the pelvis as it was found was anatomically impossible because the pubic bones did not reach the central line. Lucy couldn't have walked on 4 or 2 legs with the pelvis hanging open. In fact, some humans go through an ordeal in which their pubic symphysis separates. It's called childbirth. If Lucy's hip, as found in the ground, reflected her life condition, then she was essentially going about life in the same condition as a human giving birth, but instead of being from a few hours to a day or two, it was her whole life. That seems unlikely. As a result, a plaster cast was taken and it was separated along the lines that broke in the original into separate parts. And then the parts were rearranged to bring the medial margin of the pubic bone to the central line, and lo and behold, that gave Lucy a human-like pelvis. Further, there simply isn't enough volume of bone for a chimp-like pelvis, because chimp pelvises are not just oriented differently to humans, but they also extend much farther posteriorly. So to have a chimp-like pelvis, bone needs to be added, something which is in fact dishonest, unlike rearranging shattered bone into a shape that is biologically possible.
So there's a subjectivity involved in reconstructing these skeletal elements.
Well, that's not technically false. All paleontological reconstructions will be somewhat speculative, but the speculation is bounded by the bones that are present, the wider field of biology, etc. There simply is no option for reconstructing Lucy as a knuckle-walking quadruped that is not dishonest with the evidence. If we include the evidence from other Australopiths, then the only conclusion we can draw without ignoring evidence is that because of an arched foot with an inline big toe, a valgus knee, a sagittally oriented iliac crest, a ventral foramen magnum, and lumbar lordosis, Lucy was absolutely an upright walking bipedal ape, albeit likely one who spent more time in the trees than is typical for a modern human.
Okay, and by the way, it had an ape-like big toe. So did you notice in the video, let's look at that video again.
Well, Australopithecus, the southern ape, was an ape, so yes. But I'm not sure what exactly he means by ape-like in this context, since Brian himself has an ape-like big toe. But look, let's take a break. This nonsense is exhausting. We'll continue next time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't like it, then hit dislike and let me know what the problem was. Either way, please subscribe if you haven't already and turn on all notifications so that occasionally YouTube might tell you about my content if they feel like it, regardless of your wishes. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovand, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Ella Runteller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostock Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Wallace, John Ackerman, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.